What is up, everybody? I'm out here in southern Utah, out here in the desert, shooting a really cool rock formation out here. I want to show you guys a few of my favorite compositional tricks to help you guys capture those really stunning photos. Obviously, getting things like great light and great edits are super important to capturing a great photo, but none of that would be possible without a great composition. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 of my absolute favorite composition tricks that I'm teaching to my clients in my workshops. Some of these things are oftentimes not things that you may think of. So hang tight. I'm going to show you guys 5 of these tricks. I have a GoPro with me, so I'm going to show you guys a little bit of that behind the scenes footage to kind of show you exactly what I mean. So let's go ahead and get started. So tip number 1 is to think a lot about how high or low you're shooting. A lot of photographers will roll up to the scene and they'll just start shooting at eye level. Now the problem with that is that you're oftentimes not exposing the most exciting angle. Eye level oftentimes can be pretty boring. So one thing photographers can do is either get low and get more foreground in their shot, or get a little bit higher to kind of compress the scene a little bit more. So I'm always trying lots of different heights on my tripod, and when I'm handheld shooting it, I'm also trying lots of different heights up and down to figure out exactly what I like. One thing I really love to do when I'm on scene is before I even put my camera on the tripod, I like to just hold my camera in my hand, and I like to bend down, stand up, and find exactly where the photo looks the best, rather than trying to find it with my tripod, because finding a composition with your tripod can oftentimes be really clunky, and making it lower or higher to kind of match the scene that you want can be difficult. So if you find that spot just by hand holding your camera, first of all, you'll be able to much easier dial your tripod in and really make sure that scene looks great at the level that the tripod is at, or that you're hand holding it at. So tip number 2 is to think about the sunlight in your scene. A lot of times photographers will go out and they'll have a subject in mind and they just want to go straight out and shoot it at sunset or at sunrise without really even thinking about where the sun is going to be. A lot of compositions shoot better at sunrise and a lot of compositions shoot better at sunset. What I'm shooting tonight, I've got this nice rock and I want it to be backlit so the sun is behind and it's kind of bleeding through on my image. Now, a lot of times if you're out in the mountains, maybe you want that morning light on the mountains, so you don't want it to be backlit. You want it to be front lit. So you want the sun to be behind you. So there's a lot of different things to think about with the sun. There's not necessarily a great way to do it, but oftentimes if you want to capture those really great clouds, you need to have the sun backlit in your scene so that they light up the clouds in your scene. Whereas if you want that nice alpenglow on the mountains or something like that, you're going to need to have the sun be behind you rather than behind the subject. So always think about where the sunlight is. So tip number 3 is to always have a really interesting subject. This seems really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many photos are out there where there's just not an interesting subject or anything interesting going on. This is a huge problem because in order to create a great photo, you need something interesting. Maybe it's a great sky, or maybe it's a cool rock, or maybe even a combination of the two. So out here, what I'm shooting tonight, you can see that we've got this really cool rock feature, and I'm trying to find a little foreground to kind of work into that scene to give me some leading lines. So it's really important that not only do I have that cool, interesting subject, I also have a cool foreground that's kind of leading me into the scene. But in any photo, there's always going to be something abnormal or interesting that's going to make an interesting subject. Without that, you just simply have a documentary photo of something that's not too terribly exciting. So always think about what is the interesting subject in your composition. Now, a lot of times when you're out somewhere where you don't have just a really cool rock formation like this, say you're in a forest and it's really hard to find a cool composition because you can't find a cool subject. What I like to do is I like to find, let's say, a really cool looking tree, for example. And then after I find that tree, I like to walk around and find the composition that works best with that one cool subject. So I'll revolve that cool subject and find a foreground in order to find the exact perfect shot that I want. And a lot of times it's easier to find that interesting foreground or a foreground with leading lines than it is to find that cool subject. So always prioritize finding a cool subject when you're out shooting something that hasn't been photographed before. Tip number 4 is to use the grid lines on your camera. Now, most cameras have some sort of grid lines, so I set my camera up to be 2/3 grid, which means that each photo is sectioned off into thirds. And I really like doing that because you've probably heard about the rule of thirds and all this and all that. I'm not going to get into that, but they definitely do make sense. Having your subject either in the center or off to the left third or the right third of the frame really helps make an interesting photo. You don't want your subject to be at the very bottom or touching the edge or anything like that. So it's super important that you think about your composition and exactly how you're composing it. Maybe you should zoom out or zoom in order to get your subject right in the right spot. But you'll see in a lot of my photos, I have that subject in the right hand corner or the left hand corner, but you'll notice it's almost in the same spot every single time. It's always on that 1/3 mark. You won't ever really see my subject in the very top corner on one side or another, because it's really hard for a viewer to look at a photo and go straight to the corner. They want to look somewhere in the center. So I'm always thinking about pathing my viewer into the frame by using those grid lines on my camera. And once you've used the grid lines a lot, you'll find that you don't really have to use them anymore. But as a newer photographer who's still trying to figure out exactly getting those great compositions, it's really helpful to have those grid lines turned on. So the last tip that I have is one of my biggest pet peeves, and that is to watch the corners of your frame. So many photographers I see have something that's just clipping the corner of their frame and it's drawing your eye outside. If you don't fix this in the field, you need to do it in post-processing, because when you have a tree or a rock or something just slightly sticking into the edge of the frame, it's distracting. And we want to get rid of as many distracting elements as we can so that the viewer is looking straight into the center of the photo. So always think about everything in your composition, not just the subject, because everything in your composition should be absolutely intentional and necessary to be there, or else it shouldn't be in your composition. Thank you guys so much for checking out this weekend's video. I really hope this was helpful. I know that a lot of photographers aren't too excited when learning about composition, but these compositional tips have helped me take so many of my clients to the next level in their photography. Just things that are so helpful that you wouldn't even think of, and they're just small, subtle changes. But this is really what is going to help you change from an amateur photographer to a really well-experienced veteran photographer taking really amazing photos. Please let me know if you guys have any questions or comments. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys next weekend. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.